Jerry Jones, and this is a portion of the game that I sound off on last night about the Cowboys and the Packers game. I was talking about the Jerry Jones and the Micah Parsons stuff, how I consumed media on Monday, and I was seeing everybody's takes when it refers to Micah Parsons, and everybody was talking about, oh, if Micah Parsons was a part of the game on Sunday, the Dallas Cowboys could have won the game. It was that one defensive stop that the Dallas Cowboys needed. And I was sitting there hollering, bull jive, bull jive, bull jive. If Micah Parsons was there, it would have been the same result, or the Cowboys would have lost. And that was my argument. But Jerry Jones had this to say. He said, and I quote, "It's very simple." And he's referring to paying Dak and not Micah Parsons. He said this, and I quote, "It's very simple. Dak was indispensable in my mind, and Micah Parsons wasn't." Now, after first reading this, I was sitting here like, that was a little harsh. That was very personal. There's just some things that you never want to say in public. And, in behind the scenes, fine, all good and dandy. Because if y'all guys watched the Dallas Cowboys documentary when Jimmy Johnson and Jerry Jones had the whole fallout and stuff, Jerry Jones never publicly crapped on Jimmy Johnson. But we saw behind the scenes all that junk that he talked about Jimmy Johnson when the whole thing was going on about him, flirting with taking the Jaguars job. So Jerry Jones, by all means, if you feel a certain way about Micah Parsons, say it behind the scenes, say it to Steven and everybody else in the front office, fine. Just don't go out to the media and say this. It's not like you won the game. It ended in a tie for what it's worth. But this is just adding on to the Micah Parsons and Jerry Jones discourse that has been very just stressful for me and super draining to talk about. I'm tired of talking about it. I'm ready to move on. While I was consuming the Packers and Cowboys leading up to the game, it was just so frustrating the morning of. Everybody in the media was just talking about Micah Parsons is going to do this. What's going to happen with Jerry Jones and if Micah Parsons sacks Dak, blah, 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 blah. I'm just sitting here like, can we move on? As a fan of football, as media, can we just go ahead and live the fact that Micah Parsons is a member of the Green Bay Packers? He's not a member of the Dallas Cowboys anymore. Who cares who's going to win or lose? Because I can predict right now, I was very high on the Packers, but I don't think they're going to win a Super Bowl. If you're going to let the Dallas Cowboys do that to you, what makes you think a other contender is going to do that to you? Because, newsflash, they're not going to let Jordan Love drop 40 points. That's not going to happen. But I digress. But let's get back to the task at hand. Me personally, I thought Jerry Jones could have said this a little bit better. Because there's a whole couple of, and I might talk about it tomorrow night if I have another show tomorrow night. Micah Parsons, there was a whole lot of back and forth about the whole phone call thing when he got traded. There was a whole thing about that today. But I thought Jerry Jones was a little harsh with his comment. Now, was he 100% wrong? No, because I did some stats. I did some research. And I found something super duper interesting. And Colin Cowherd discussed it today on The Herd. The edge rusher is not the super important position right now in the NFL. It's really not. If you go down the list, outside of Nick Bosa, because they were able to develop talent around Nick Bosa, who are the highest paid edge rushers? Max Crosby, where's his team at? TJ Watt, where has his team historically been the last couple of years? Myles Garrett, where has his team been at? Brian Burns, where has his team been at? Josh Allen Hines, where has his team been at? So those are a couple names of the highest paid edge rushers right now. And you see relatively where all their teams have been when it comes to contending for a Super Bowl, because that is the ultimate goal for Jerry Jones and the Cowboys, right? It's always been about Super Bowl. Heck, for any team, it's always been about the Super Bowl. Now, I went and did some research, and I was pretty interested because I kind of knew my answer to my own, hypothesis. I was curious. I went back and looked and saw in the last 10 to 15 years, out of all the teams, for the winning team, who had a super dominant edge rusher on their roster? Out of the last 10 years, I found one team. That was the Denver Broncos in Super Bowl 50 when they had Von Miller. That was the last team to win a Super Bowl that had a super dominant edge rusher. The Eagles, when they won it, who did they have on the defensive line? They had Jalen Carter, interior. What about the Chiefs? Chris Jones, interior. What about the Patriots? They were well-versed on defense all around. Who else am I missing? The Rams, you had Aaron Donald in the middle. Hello? Those were the players that were playing for the Super Bowl winning teams. They didn't have prolific edge rushers. Only Von Miller. And another thing that we can say too as well is that team that had Von Miller, you had DeMarcus Ware. You had Cameron, I think his name was Cameron Wolfe in the middle at the defensive interior. You had Anthony Tredavis or something like that at the linebacker position. You had Aqib Talib. You had CJ Harris at corner. You had an elite safety as well. I can't remember the guy's name on the top of my head, but they were elite. You know, the Broncos were really historically one of the best defenses to ever be assembled. They're not Legion of Boom type historic, but they were a darn good defense. And they put Cam Newton in an absolute blender in that Super Bowl. That is how elite that defensive tandem was. So if you can see, to put context into what Jerry Jones is trying to say and what the whole purpose of the Micah Parsons trade was for, is like, look, yes, we got the next, and he's been compared to this, we got the next Lawrence Taylor, Reggie White. I get it. But at the end of the day, we need players. One player is not going to get us to the promised land. And we could not afford to give this guy north of $45, $46, $47 million. In the case of the Packers, $47 million. You just can't do it. Not when you need every other position on the field at the moment. You need linebackers. You need safeties. You need defensive linemen. You need everything. So investing all that money into one person was not going to help that part of the defense. Because guess what? As we just previously stated, when Von Miller was on that team, they had a whole lot of other talent as well. It wasn't just Von Miller. They had DeMarcus Ware. Granted, he was on the latter part of his career, but darn it, he's about to be a future Hall of Fame. He is a Hall of Famer. I think he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. On the opposite side of him, rushing the quarterback, you had Cameron Wolfe, who was a darn good defensive tackle at the time. You had stud linebackers. You had two great corners in Aqib Talib and CJ Harris. Granted, Aqib Talib was on the latter part of his career as well, but CJ Harris was elite, considered elite at that time. I think they had AJ Boye as well. They were absolutely stacked at corner. And then at safety, they had a great safety. I think Jimmy Ward, that was his name. Jimmy Ward. Straight hit, sticking everybody. That defense they had that year was super elite. Name me anybody on the Dallas Cowboys right now, even remotely close to those guys, at any position. No one. Kenny Clark is better than Cameron Wolfe. But right now, even as old as DeMarcus Ware was, there's nobody as good as DeMarcus Ware on that defensive line. There's nobody at linebacker better than any of them fellas. Definitely nobody at corner. Maybe Deron Bland was better than Aqib Talib at the time. But nobody was better than CJ Harris. Or even anybody at Jimmy Ward at safety. So that was my cup of tea. And plus two, Jerry Jones has always believed that Dak Prescott could lead him to the Super Bowl. And this Dak Prescott that has been showing up so far this season is capable of winning the next Super Bowl. But granted, it's never been the problem of regular season with Dak Prescott. It's always been the problem of what can you do in the playoffs. And this year, we can go ahead and say that we're not going to be able to answer that question because the Dallas Cowboys is not even going to make the playoffs. They're not. I don't care what anybody says, they're not making the playoffs. So did Jerry Jones, was he right? Do I ultimately agree that he should have traded Micah Parsons? Yes, because I think in the long term, the Dallas Cowboys are going to be better. You get draft picks. There is specifically guys like Caleb Downs. You got some good offensive tackles. There's just a stud edge rusher right now in Miami. You got enough of picks to get some players. So I think it was the right move. Because you just cannot have an elite superstar like Micah Parsons and a bag of chips. You got to have complementary pieces around the whole defense. And another thing that we can say as well, which is 100% true, Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys put themselves in this position. I've been over here playing the wrong daggone. I've been over here playing the wrong stuff and the wrong graphics the whole time. Excuse me for that. Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys put themselves in this position because they could have signed Micah Parsons early and they could have done a better job drafting players, but they did not do that, and they put themselves in this hole, in this situation, to where they had no choice but to get rid of Micah Parsons. It could end up working out in their favor. And it could end up being what the franchise in the best interest in the future of the franchise. It's just we will never know until a couple years down the road. If they're able to, in the next 2 years, those 4 first-round picks, if two of them become fringe all-pro players, pro bowlers, and then the other 2 are just super key contributors, and if the Green Bay Packers aren't able to win a Super Bowl with Micah Parsons, that is going to be the only way we are going to be able to tell who won or lost this trade.